Nobody gasped. Nobody clapped. For a fraction of a second, nobody even breathed. The cameras kept rolling, as if they sensed history didn't need sound to announce itself. One sentence had just landed in the room, sharp and clean, and the effect was immediate. Faces froze mid-expression. Pens stopped moving. The air felt heavier, like gravity had shifted without warning. This wasn't outrage or applause. It was something rarer. It was recognition. Across America, living rooms and phone screens mirrored the same reaction. People leaned closer. Comment sections stalled. Even those who disagreed felt it. Something irreversible had happened, and everyone knew it. A single line had cracked through weeks of posturing, talking points, and performative outrage, leaving nothing to hide behind. No insults followed. No rapid rebuttal. Just silence. And silence in that room was louder than any shout. Moments like this aren't supposed to happen in politics anymore. Not cleanly. Not honestly. We're conditioned to expect chaos, not clarity. Noise, not precision. But this line didn't scramble for attention. It didn't beg to go viral. It didn't need context in that instant to feel devastating. It landed because it was calm, because it was true, because it exposed something the cameras weren't supposed to catch. The woman who spoke, it didn't raise her voice. She didn't smirk. She didn't celebrate. She simply let the words sit there, untouched, daring anyone pretend they hadn't heard them. Across from her, confidence drained in real time. The posture changed. The certainty flickered. Power shifted without a single interruption. Viewers sensed it immediately. This wasn't a debate point. This was a moment people would replay, argue about, and feel in their gut. A reminder that dignity still has weight, that restraint can still cut deeper than rage. The clip would soon explode online, but in that instant, before the headlines, before the hashtags, there was only that line, hanging in the air, unanswered. And the question spreading through the silence wasn't what she said, but how one sentence could carry that much force. To understand why it landed, why it shifted power, and why the country couldn't look away, the story has to move backward, to everything that built toward this collision, a moment shaped by choices, history, identity, and the tension that had been simmering long before the cameras ever started rolling that day in Washington for all to see. This wasn't just about two lawmakers trading lines under fluorescent lights. It was about two ideas of America colliding in plain sight, one built on spectacle, provocation, and endless outrage cycles, the other rooted in lived experience, discipline, and the belief that words still mean something. That contrast is why the silence hit so hard, and why the clip refused to stay confined to the room where it happened. For years, politics has rewarded volume over substance. The loudest voice wins the segment. The sharpest insult earns a headline, and the algorithm decides who matters. Outrage became a business model, and performative confrontation replaced persuasion. Viewers grew numb, expecting every exchange to dissolve into chaos before the truth ever arrived. That expectation made this moment different, because instead of feeding the noise, it punctured it. Journalists sensed it immediately. You could almost see reporters leaning forward, notebooks forgotten, instincts firing. This was another quote to be framed and spun. It was a rupture. On social media, fingers hovered over screens, waiting. Twitter was already primed, not with facts, but with feeling. People knew something consequential had occurred, even if they couldn't yet explain why. What made it resonate nationally was who was watching. Immigrants who recognized restraint as survival. Young people exhausted by politics as performance. Communities who understood that dignity is often mistaken for weakness until it isn't. They saw themselves in the calm, in the refusal to shout back, in the choice to respond with clarity instead of chaos. This wasn't just representation. It was validation. The exchange became a mirror held up to modern American discourse. It asked an uncomfortable question. Have we mistaken cruelty for strength and noise for leadership? The reaction suggested many Americans were ready for something else. Ready to see composure disrupt arrogance. Ready to watch truth unsettle theatrics. Ready to believe that restraint could still command a room and force accountability. Without spectacle. This is why the moment escaped partisan lanes. Even critics replayed it. Even skeptics paused. The line didn't belong to one side. It belonged to the audience that felt the shift. It reminded people that power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly and leaves everyone scrambling to catch up. What happened next would turn a routine hearing into a national reckoning, exposing not just one lawmaker's miscalculation, but the fragile foundation of a political style built on provocation alone. And to understand how that foundation was laid, and why it finally cracked, we have to look closely at the figure who believed the spotlight would protect her. She had mastered the rhythms of outrage, the camera-ready defiance, the confidence that controversy itself was a shield. For years, that strategy worked, rewarding provocation with attention and mistaking attention for authority. But moments like this reveal the limits of that armor. When faced with calm instead of chaos, performance loses its power. And as the silence lingered, it became clear this wasn't an accident or a lucky line. It was an inevitable collision between a persona built for headlines and a presence forged by consequence. The reckoning didn't begin with an insult. It began with exposure. And the woman on the receiving end of that exposure would soon realize that the spotlight she trusted so deeply could just as easily turn unforgiving. That realization sets the stage for understanding who she was, how she rose, and why she walked into that room believing control was guaranteed. It is a story of confidence, contradiction, and the arrogance that often precedes a fall. America was about to see it clearly. Nancy Mace didn't stumble into relevance. She engineered it. Over time, she learned exactly how modern political attention works and how easily it can be harvested. Sharp elbows, sharper sound bites. Every confrontation framed as proof of toughness, every viral moment treated as validation. In a system that rewards visibility more than consistency, she became fluent in spectacle, comfortable with friction, confident that provocation itself was a form of power. Her persona was built for cameras, combative when challenged, dismissive when cornered, quick to escalate because escalation guaranteed oxygen. Headlines followed, and with them came a feedback loop that reinforced the strategy. Outrage produced clicks. Clicks produced coverage. Coverage produced influence. Somewhere along the way, confrontation stopped being a tactic and became an identity. The fight was no longer a means to an end. It was the point. Contradictions piled up quietly. Appeals to civility existed alongside viral taunts. Claims of principle sat beside moments clearly designed for attention. But in the noise economy of modern politics, consistency mattered less than confidence. And Mace had confidence in abundance. She spoke as if the room belonged to her, as if dominance was something you could claim simply by refusing to yield an inch. Years of overexposure sharpened that belief. When every clash ends with your name trending, it's easy to mistake attention for control. When critics react exactly as expected, it feels like mastery. Familiarity bred not caution, but complacency. The rhythms of outrage became predictable, almost comforting. Push hard. Watch the reaction. Reset. Repeat. It worked often enough to feel foolproof. By the time she walked into that hearing, Mace believed she understood the script better than anyone else. She had played this role before. She had watched opponents flinch, lose their footing, raise their voices. She had seen how quickly a calm room could turn chaotic, and she knew how to thrive inside that chaos. The confidence wasn't reckless in her mind. It was earned. She believed she controlled the room. What she didn't account for was how fragile that control really was. Spectacle depends on participation. Provocation requires a reaction. Without it, the performance collapses under its own weight. That vulnerability is easy to miss when attention has always arrived on cue, when the spotlight feels permanent and forgiving. Mace entered the exchange certain of two things: that she would dominate the tempo, and that any resistance would come in a familiar form of anger or defensiveness. She was prepared to swat those away. What she wasn't prepared for was restraint. She wasn't prepared for silence that wasn't submission. She wasn't prepared for someone who didn't need the spotlight, because they didn't measure power the same way. The seeds of unraveling were already there, planted by years of believing visibility was the same as authority. In rooms like this, that illusion can hold, right up until it doesn't, right up until someone refuses to play their assigned role, right up until confidence meets clarity and discovers it has nowhere to hide. Mace didn't see the danger because it didn't look like danger. It looked like calm. It looked like patience. It looked like someone waiting, not retreating. And that misread would matter more than any insult or interruption. Because while Mace was certain she had the upper hand, certain the moment would bend toward her as it always had, she missed the quiet recalibration happening across the table. Across the room sat someone Mace had clearly underestimated. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in that room by accident, and she did not sit silently because she had nothing to say. Her stillness was earned. Before politics, before cable news, before viral clips, she trained her mind in courtrooms where words carry consequences and timing decides outcomes. She learned early that volume is rarely persuasive, and that precision can move mountains when noise cannot. That discipline stayed with her. Her background shaped her posture. As a lawyer, she learned to listen longer than others were comfortable with, to let opponents reveal themselves, to wait until the truth was undeniable before speaking aloud. In spaces designed to intimidate, she learned composure as survival. In rooms where power tried to talk over her, she learned patience as strategy. Calm was never weakness for her. It was preparation. That history mattered in this moment. While others mistook her silence for passivity, Crockett understood something deeper. Silence can be a mirror. It gives people space to expose their intentions, their insecurities, their hunger for attention. She wasn't retreating. She was observing. Every interruption, every performative flourish, every attempt to dominate the exchange only sharpened her understanding of exactly where the fault lines lay. There's a temptation in modern politics to chase the clip, to say the loud thing that will travel fastest. Crockett resisted that instinct because her work had taught her what lasts. She had spent years advocating for people whose lives were shaped by policy, not headlines. Immigrants navigating systems stacked against them. Families whose stories were ignored unless someone took the time to tell them carefully. Those experiences trained her to value truth over theatrics. When Crockett finally spoke, it wasn't impulse. It was intention. Every word had been weighed. Every pause accounted for. She understood the power of contrast, how calm in the face of provocation can reveal character more clearly than any accusation. She didn't need to raise her voice to command attention because she trusted the substance of what she carried. This is where admiration quietly builds, not because she sought the spotlight, but because she refused to chase it. She wasn't there to win a clip. She was there to tell the truth. That distinction matters. It changes how you listen. It changes how you speak. It changes how you use power when you finally claim the floor. Her restraint was not rooted in caution, but confidence. Confidence born from preparation, from lived experience, from knowing that dignity doesn't require permission. She had watched politics reward cruelty and confuse aggression with strength, but she also knew that audiences are perceptive. People can feel when someone is performing and when someone is grounded. She trusted that. Crockett's identity informed her clarity. She understood what it means to be underestimated, to be expected to react instead of respond. She understood how often composure is demanded from some and optional for others. Rather than resist that reality, she weaponized her discipline. She let others mistake her calm for concession, knowing the correction would be more powerful when it arrived. As the exchange unfolded, she remained still, eyes forward, absorbing everything. The contrast was already forming, one side escalating, the other waiting, one feeding the noise, the other sharpening the truth. Viewers at home felt it, even before they could articulate it. This wasn't avoidance. This was control of a different kind. Everything in her background had led to this posture. Every courtroom lesson, every moment of being talked over, every reminder that credibility is built quietly and revealed suddenly. When Crockett chose her moment, it would not be by accident. It would be by design. And when she finally spoke, the room would understand why silence had been her preparation, and why the response about to come could only belong to someone who had learned to turn restraint into resolve. The exchange didn't erupt all at once. It tightened. It narrowed. It became sharper with every interruption and every smirk that followed. Words were no longer just words. They were weapons, deployed with intent. The temperature in the room rose not because voices were raised at first, but because restraint was being tested. You could feel the imbalance forming, volume pressing against substance, impatience grinding against control. Nancy Mace leaned forward more often now, her tone sharpened, each sentence carrying an edge meant to provoke a response. The interruptions came quicker, layered with a confidence that bordered on dismissal. She spoke over points instead of addressing them, as if momentum itself were proof of correctness. The performance intensified. This was familiar territory for her. Pressure applied loudly, repeatedly, until the other side cracked. Crockett did not. If anything, she grew stiller. Her expression barely changed as the interruptions stacked up. She listened, eyes steady, posture composed. To some, it looked like restraint stretched thin. To others, it looked like something gathering. The contrast was unmistakable now. One side pushing harder, louder, faster. The other refusing to match the pace, refusing to surrender the rhythm of the room. Subtle disrespect crept in, the kind that rarely makes transcripts but always lands. The dismissive tone, the half-smile meant for the cameras, the confidence that assumes the audience is already on your side. Mace fed that energy, trusting it would carry her through as it always had. Each jab was an invitation to react, to stumble into the chaos where she felt most powerful. Around them, the room sensed it. People shifted in their seats. Journalists stopped typing as quickly, waiting instead. There was a collective awareness that the exchange was approaching a point of no return. This wasn't banter anymore. It was pressure, the kind that reveals who someone is when the script stops working. Crockett's silence stretched longer, and with it, the tension. Every interruption only amplified it. Viewers at home felt imbalance, even if they couldn't yet name it. One voice was filling space. The other was conserving it. One was demanding attention. The other was commanding patience. It felt unsustainable, like a held breath. Mace mistook the quiet for hesitation. She leaned into it, voice rising, confidence swelling. The strategy was clear: overwhelm, dominate, move on. She had seen this end before, with opponents flustered and defensive. The pattern was familiar, almost routine. But routines fail when conditions change, and this room was changing. Crockett remained composed, her calm now impossible to ignore. It wasn't passive. It was deliberate. She wasn't shrinking from the moment. She was shaping it. Each second of silence reframed the exchange, making the noise around her feel increasingly hollow. The louder Mace grew, the clearer the contrast became. Every great moment of history has a calm before impact. This was it. The room hovered there, suspended between escalation and release. You could sense the shift approaching, the instinctive understanding that something was about to break through the noise and reset the balance entirely. Then Crockett finally spoke. When Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, she didn't rush. The room was already quiet, but her pause deepened it. She looked forward, not at the cameras, not at the reactions she knew were waiting to happen, but straight ahead, as if grounding herself in the weight of the moment. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even almost gentle. That calm was the first blow. The line itself wasn't long. It didn't rely on insult or exaggeration. It didn't raise the temperature. Instead, it lowered it, stripping away the noise that had filled the room and leaving only truth behind. It was precise, measured, and devastating in its simplicity. The words landed not because they were loud, but because they were undeniable. For a split second, nothing happened. Then you could see it. The shift. Faces froze mid-reaction. A few mouths opened slightly, then closed again. The confidence that had filled the space moments earlier evaporated, replaced by something harder to mask. Realization. Crockett didn't celebrate the line or emphasize it. She let it sit there, untouched, allowing its meaning to expand on its own. What made the line so powerful was timing. It arrived after escalation, after interruption, after spectacle had exhausted itself. It didn't interrupt the chaos. It followed it like punctuation at the end of a sentence that suddenly made the entire paragraph make sense. Crockett understood that truth, delivered too early, can be ignored. Delivered at the right moment, it can't be escaped. The tone mattered just as much. There was no anger in her voice, no defensiveness, no attempt to score points. That restraint reframed the entire exchange. Rage suddenly looked small. Volume looked insecure. The line didn't attack. It exposed. It flipped the power dynamic by refusing to engage on the terms that had been set. Nancy Mace's reaction was immediate and visible. The posture shifted. The assured expression faltered. For the first time, she looked unsure of her next move. The strategy that had always worked suddenly had nowhere to go. You could see the calculation happening in real time, the scramble to regain footing in a moment that refused to be wrestled back into spectacle. This is where the moral reversal happened. For minutes, aggression had been presented as strength. Control had been associated with dominance. Crockett's line dismantled that illusion in seconds. Strength was redefined as clarity. Control as composure. The room recalibrated around that truth, without anyone needing to say it aloud. The brilliance of the line was that it required no follow-up. Any attempt to shout it down would only confirm it. Any interruption would underline its accuracy. Crockett knew that, which is why she stopped speaking. She trusted the silence to finish the work. And it did. Mace attempted to respond, but the momentum was gone. Words that once landed cleanly now sounded rushed, defensive. The confidence that had filled the room earlier collapsed into irritation, then into something closer to frustration. It was a rare moment when overexposure meets accountability, when a performance meets a boundary it can't cross. Around them, the audience processed what they had just witnessed. This wasn't a clever comeback. It was a reframing of the entire exchange. The cameras caught it, but they didn't create it. The power of the moment came from its authenticity, from the sense that something honest had broken through layers of posturing. Viewers at home knew instantly they'd just seen something rare, not because it was dramatic, but because it was clean, because it reminded them of a version of politics they weren't sure still existed, one where dignity could still command attention, one where truth didn't need amplification to be effective. The clip would soon be dissected, replayed, turned into headlines and arguments. But in that room, before any of that happened, there was only the quiet understanding that something had ended, the illusion of control, the belief that noise could always overpower substance. Crockett hadn't raised her voice, but she had changed the temperature permanently. Mace's confidence didn't shatter all at once. It leaked out moment by moment as the realization set in that the room no longer belonged to her. The spotlight she trusted had shifted. It was no longer forgiving. It was revealing, and there was no easy way to step out of it. Crockett remained composed, her expression unchanged. She didn't press the advantage. She didn't need to. The work was done. The line stood on its own, echoing louder with every second of silence that followed. It had transformed the exchange from confrontation into consequence. This is why the moment mattered. Not because someone was embarrassed, but because a standard had been reasserted. A reminder that restraint can be revolutionary, that clarity can dismantle arrogance faster than rage ever could. And as the room slowly exhaled, it became clear that the impact of those words would not stay contained. What followed would ripple far beyond those walls, carrying the shock of that silence into every corner of the public conversation. The silence didn't last long once the clip escaped the room. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Screens lit up. Group chats buzzed. Feeds refreshed faster than facts could catch up. A moment that had unfolded quietly now roared across the country, amplified by millions who recognized its weight instinctively. Hashtag surge, not carefully coordinated, but organic, fueled by a shared sense that something had shifted. Commentators scrambled to keep pace. Pundits paused mid-segment to replay the line again, searching for language strong enough to describe what viewers already felt. Some praised the composure. Others tried to downplay it. A few attempted defensive spin, insisting it was being overblown. But the narrative no longer belonged to them. Control had slipped away from the usual gatekeepers and landed squarely with the audience. Memes followed, sharp and immediate, distilling the moment into images and captions that carried its essence even further. Humor mixed with admiration. Analysis mixed with emotion. What stood out wasn't uniform agreement, but uniform attention. People across ideological lines watched the same clip and reacted, if not with praise, then with acknowledgement. You couldn't ignore it. You had to deal with it. That's how the shift became undeniable. This wasn't confined to partisan echo chambers. It wasn't just one side cheering its champion. Even critics replayed the moment, dissecting it frame by frame, searching for a counter that never quite landed. The clip didn't demand loyalty. It demanded recognition. It forced viewers to confront what they had seen, regardless of where they stood. The balance of power in the conversation changed. Instead of debating who won, people debated what it meant. The focus moved away from personalities and toward posture, restraint versus rage, substance versus spectacle, dignity versus dominance. The line had opened a door and millions walked through it, carrying their own experiences with them. For immigrants, for marginalized communities, for anyone who had learned to survive by staying composed in hostile rooms, the moment felt deeply personal. It was a public affirmation of something long understood privately. That calm can be armor. That truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. That you don't have to abandon yourself to be heard. The clip traveled far because it answered a hunger. People were tired of noise masquerading as leadership, tired of cruelty framed as strength. This moment offered an alternative, not as theory, but as proof. It showed what happens when discipline meets opportunity, when someone refuses to perform and instead insists on clarity. Attempts to dismiss it only fueled its spread. Every critique amplified it. Every effort to minimize it confirmed its impact. The more it was replayed, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a viral exchange. It was a rupture in the script people had grown used to. The narrative no longer centered on outrage. It centered on consequence, on how quickly a room can turn when someone refuses to play their assigned role, on how fragile performative power becomes when exposed to calm resolve. The clip became shorthand for a broader truth, shared not because it flattered anyone, but because it felt honest. As the shockwaves continued, it became obvious that the real significance of the moment wasn't the embarrassment of one lawmaker or the rise of another. It was a collective recognition that something deeper had been revealed, a glimpse of what American discourse could look like if dignity were allowed to lead again. But the real power of the moment came from what it revealed about America itself. In the aftermath, the moment demanded reflection. It wasn't simply about one exchange or one politician. It was a lesson in what leadership can look like when grounded in dignity. Across a nation often saturated with noise, the line reminded people that strength doesn't shout. Strength stands. It doesn't need applause or approval to carry weight. It doesn't demand to be seen. It demands to be felt. Jasmine Crockett's calm had done more than land a takedown. It had reframed the conversation entirely. Restraint became a weapon, truth became a lens, and the audience realized that composure could be far more influential than anger. In that stillness, viewers recognized an unspoken rule. Power is not measured in decibels or trending hashtags. Power is measured in clarity, in conviction, in the courage to stay anchored in principle when chaos tempts you to stray. The exchange reflected core American values. Fairness was affirmed, as the moment called attention to integrity over spectacle. Respect prevailed, proving that listening carefully and speaking thoughtfully carries more resonance than empty theatrics. Resilience was on full display, showing that long preparation, lived experience, and moral certainty can withstand provocation, and, in doing so, inspire others. These weren't abstract lessons. They were tangible, visible, and immediate, unfolding in real time for a country hungry for reminders of what democracy can aspire to. For viewers at home, the resonance was personal. It validated the quiet struggles of those who navigate life with integrity despite noise and opposition. It reminded immigrants, advocates, and anyone overlooked that patience, preparation, and honesty hold transformative power. You don't need volume to have power. You don't need fury to command attention. You don't need to perform to be respected. True influence grows from rootedness, not from reaction. Moments like these are rare, and their impact reaches beyond a single clip or viral cycle. They echo because they touch something enduring. The idea that the principles we uphold in private, discipline, dignity, courage, matter just as much, if not more, than the theatrics we see in public. The line that stunned the room carried this truth, and its lesson was clear. When you choose clarity over noise, composure over chaos, and integrity over ego, the world notices, and it often follows. As the nation absorbed the exchange, the moral became unmistakable. Leadership isn't about domination. Influence isn't about shouting. History remembers those who act with conviction, who respond with truth, and who stand firmly, even when the room trembles with expectation. Crockett's moment was more than a political victory. It was a reminder that courage is quiet, power is precise, and dignity is indestructible. America watched in shock as Jasmine Crockett took down Nancy Mace in one line, and now we see why it mattered. It wasn't just a moment of confrontation. It was a lesson in restraint, clarity, and dignity, a reminder that true strength doesn't demand attention, it commands it. This is a moment to reflect, to discuss, to share, and to carry forward in how we approach challenges in our own lives. Join the conversation. Comment with your thoughts. Share the story that stunned a nation, and remember, you don't need volume to have power. Be part of shaping a culture that values truth, composure, and courage above all.